Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast exists because I wanted police officers to hear the wisdom and encouragement from the older, experienced officers that I was learning from. But that information doesn't always filter down to them, so I have these conversations in order for cops to get life-saving and career-changing support. On this podcast, you'll hear from detectives and dispatchers, U.S. Marshals and county sheriffs, and the occasional U.S. Army doctor. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are sharing their wisdom and experience so that you don't have to do everything the hard way. Today I want to welcome back Dr. Barry Young. Barry is a friend and fellow police chaplain, and my favorite peer support and chaplain trainer. On Hey Chaplain, he was previously in a very highly rated episode, bonus episode number 24, where we talked about bad death notifications. Today, Barry is back, and this time he's going to talk about the phenomenon of leakage, where the intentions to take a life are telegraphed ahead of time, and you and I might catch the clues if we know what we're looking for. Here's Dr. Barry Young. Hello, Barry. How are you today?
Jared, I'm doing great. It's an honor to be here.
I'm glad to have you. I'm always happy to see you. And I wanted you to come in and talk to me about a topic that I don't think I had heard anybody really lay out and explain before I heard you do it at one of your trainings. And that's the topic of leakage. In the context of officer wellness, what does leakage refer to?
So in my opinion, Jared, leakage is one of the most important things that chaplains need to know, that first responders need to know, that is not talked about in graduate school, in peer support training, in chaplain training. So let me tell you what leakage is. Leakage is where somebody, homicidal and or suicidal, intentionally or unintentionally lets their desires to take life be known. And the reason suicide prevention needs to have leakage training, emotional support, wellness, chaplain training, needs to have leakage training, 90% of homicidal and suicidal people give off leakage. So one more time for the listeners, leakage is where somebody homicidal and or suicidal, intentionally or unintentionally, lets their desires to take life be known.
I was doing some research on this here just recently, and I looked at one study in particular, and there's lots of different studies, but one study in particular, they looked at some 160 different mass shooters. Of those mass shooters, over half of them had a very specific plan, and then of the ones who had a plan, over half of them explicitly told their plan in detail to someone, usually a counselor. And so they did this, they did all the scientific analysis of everything we know about these mass shooters. And of the ones that told, of the ones that had leakage, they were almost all suicidal. They were almost all in counseling. There was this connection. It's not just that they wanted to kill, but they did not expect to keep going afterward. They were not fame seekers. Fame seekers are a different type of shooter, a different type of killer. But the ones who thought this is going to be my end almost couldn't help themselves but to tell someone. It's like they needed to make one last connection before they left this mortal coil, right? And I felt like, at least in that one study, that's really eye-opening. That's really, I would not have expected that. You think that every killer is going to keep their plan totally secret. And even when we're at the funeral of someone who's taken their own life, not a mass shooter or anything like that, but just someone who's taken their own life, a lot of times we'll say, well, there were no signs. We didn't know. And now I kind of am second guessing that. Maybe we weren't tuned in and there were signs.
So let me tell you how this got introduced to the mental health community. It started out in 1999. There were active shooters in schools before 1999, but not regular. Mm-hmm. In 1999, at Columbine High School in Colorado, something happened after the event, and then now, every year, according to the Washington Post, we average 20 active shooter events at public schools per year. And so in 2007, there was a former student that shot 60 people in 2 minutes at Virginia Tech. And this is where I first got acquainted with Leakage. What happened is the day before the event, he went to the gun range and pulled a silhouette on the ground, not out, but on the ground, and fired shots 8 feet above it into the ground. Well, the next day, he shot 60 people in 2 minutes, and the gun range owner told police the day before he had seen the shooter do this, but he didn't think it was important. And he connected the dots. He was practicing shooting kids that would be hiding underneath the table. Well, that was an example of unintentional leakage. Much of leakage is unintentional. And so what happened is we started, because oftentimes you nail it, somebody that's homicidal is suicidal, or if you're a police officer, you've seen a suicidal call go homicidal or vice versa. And all of a sudden we saw, oh my goodness, there is a correlation here that 90% of suicidal homicidal people give off intentional, but most often unintentional leakage. And kind of a way to define that is leakage is, if we're going to bring it to its barest model, it's the normal versus the abnormal. So my wife is a secular counselor. She graduated from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She's got a master's degree in counseling. And not that the civilian population is good at asking for help, but they're significantly better at asking for help than first responders. The likelihood of a first responder coming to a police chaplain and saying, "Chaplain, policing is too hard for me. The stress of the job, I'm not strong enough. Can you please help me out, Chaplain?" It's highly unlikely.
No.
And so what we've got to do is, when we teach active shooter, we teach you got to keep your head on a swivel. We want every chaplain in America to have a full certifiable understanding of what is leakage, how to spot it, and how to respond to it. And so in our chaplain classes, it shows up in level 1, it shows up in level 3. We do an exhaustive diagnostic teaching on it. And so we're looking for the normal versus the abnormal, and it's a way to prevent suicide in cops.
What are the stereotypical examples of leakage among police officers?
So there's 2 types. There are verbal leakage clues and nonverbal leakage. So let me start with basic leakage clues that are nonverbal, and then I want to go over to the verbal. So nonverbal would be, for example, a 30-year-old police officer is giving away valuables. If you're 30 years old, you're young at the department, and your best days are ahead of you, and you're giving away valuables, that is leakage.
Yeah, grandma giving something away, that's okay.
Totally normal.
30-year-old giving something away, that's not very normal, at least if it's off of their baseline. Maybe you have people that are super generous, and they're always generous with their stuff. That's different than the average person who at 30 years old is not typically giving things away. So in fact, that's what I think most people think are the stereotypical warning behaviors of someone who might be looking at the end of their life or contemplating the end of their life is giving away personal possessions. That's nonverbal. What other examples are there?
For somebody that's normally very quiet and all of a sudden they're very jovial, or somebody that's very jovial and now they're very quiet. You know, and the only way a chaplain can spot these is to spend time with the officers. Yeah. If you don't know the officers' personalities, it is incredibly difficult to pick up on leakage. And that's why people that love officers say, "Wow, I was really surprised. I didn't see the signs." It's because officers don't ask for help. It's because officers don't go to chaplains. They don't go to counselors.
They isolate themselves.
We have to have a relationship with them. And then we're going to be able to more easily spot leakage. Now, verbal leakage, I want to give you one that's one of my, that I can never forget. We're going to be at the Peoria, Illinois Police Department doing a chaplain training. And how I got connected with the Peoria, Illinois Police Department, one of their chaplains, Chaplain Tyson Parks III, I was teaching on leakage, and all of a sudden, the light bulb went off in his head. One of his best friends, Chaplain Tyson's in his 30s, his best friend's in his 30s. They were at a football game watching his best friend's son play football. And his 30-year-old best friend said, "Hey, if something happens to me, would you take care of my son?" Now, we expect that somebody going into combat. We expect somebody saying that's in their 80s or 90s. For a 30-year-old strong male to say, "If something happens to me, would you take care of my son?" The very next week, Chaplain Parks, one of his best friends, died by suicide. And when I was teaching on leakage, all of a sudden it hit Chaplain Parks. 2 years later, that was the example of leakage.
Yeah. Something I want to touch on, I don't know if you want to go to it right this moment. How much of a burden do we put on ourselves? You know, the loved one, the coworker dies, and then we realize, oh, they showed us a sign. Do you have a word to say about that? Do you want to touch on, like, I don't want to put an undue burden on people, like, you should have prevented this. I don't want to inadvertently say that. I think we need to be alert. I think some of these things can be prevented. Many, many people who almost take their lives say that one text stopped them from taking their life.
So the example is my own life. I tell people, don't live in guilt, but be as trained as you can possibly be trained. So, for example, when I was in college, now I did not have this level of training. I hadn't even graduated college yet. We went to Christmas in 1993, and one of my friends on the hall went to Christmas break and didn't come back. He died by suicide. And so, you know, I have to tell chaplains, and I have to tell myself, hey, I was a 20-year-old kid. I did as best as I could do. I did not see the clues. I did not know clues. And so I tell people, don't give yourself grace. But as a chaplain, let's be prepared as we can be.
Yeah.
And so what I love about leakage training, obviously we can use it, and we specialize it for police officers and first responders, but it can also be used in the ministry. It could be used with our own families, our own homes, our own children. And so it's impossible to help somebody that doesn't want to be helped. And so when somebody doesn't overtly ask us to help, you can't blame yourself.
And you may not recognize some of those things till afterwards because you don't have context. They just are acting odd today. People have permission to do that. You may not realize, oh, that odd behavior was warning behavior. If I had been looking, maybe I would have spotted it, but you can't beat yourself up for not spotting it.
That's exactly right. You can't beat yourself up for not spotting it. And anytime there's a tragedy that goes through my life or my department, I always ask myself this question: what can I learn?
Yeah.
What can I learn from this tragedy? What can I learn from this? And so for me, when somebody that I was friends with on my hall in college died by suicide, okay, what can I learn? What are tools I can add to my belt to attempt to prevent this from happening? And one other thing I would say to chaplains, counselors, clinicians, and peer support is that if somebody really wants to die by suicide, I have seen people in counseling under the care of a doctor still die by suicide.
Yeah.
John Maxwell says, excellence is doing the best with what you got. So for me, I want to get as trained as I can be. I want to, and you know, most chaplains are volunteer. I want to spend as much time as I can with the agency, with its police officers, and just do as much as I can.
Yeah.
And then I got to give myself grace.
Yeah. We had somebody years ago, a friend at church that died by suicide, and people were shocked and hurt and didn't know what to say. But in the time of any death, people say dumb things. And so I was a young minister, and this fella, he'd come and asked for help. We'd prayed with him. We were checking on him regularly, but he took his own life anyway. And it hurt us all, and we were all grieving. And I had someone come up to me as a young minister and said, hey, don't take this badly that you failed him. And I'm like, well, I wasn't taking it badly until you said that. Now that's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. And so even if you do see it coming, if you do see the signs and you attempt to help, you can't take full responsibility for the outcomes. You can only provide the help that you can provide.
I think that's so spot on. And I believe that, you know, I have seen in America, I won't give any names, but I've seen chaplains die by suicide. Yep. Police and fire chaplains die by suicide.
Church pastors.
Church pastors die by suicide. And so I tell people, you know, as a chaplain, get as much training as you can get. You know, leaders are learners, and the moment you stop learning, you stop leading. And so when I introduce leakage training in our classes, it's just we want to put another tool on that belt. If all you have is a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail.
Yeah, yeah. So where am I going to see leakage out in the wild?
You're going to see leakage in 4 places. This is the 4 places the law enforcement chaplain is going to see leakage. Number 1, online. we have data after data after data point where people put something online, they're going to kill themselves or they're going to kill another person. The second place we see that is social media. Social media sounds like it's online. It's a total different concept. And so social media, you want to be paying attention for the normal versus the abnormal. Police officers will generally not ask for help. The third place we want to see it, and we're going to look for it, is in our own personal conversations. We're on a ride along. We're at the station. We're having lunch with an officer. We're going to be looking for indirect clues. For example, I just want to eat my own gun. My family would be better off without me. We want to be look for these indirect clues. And the last place we're going to look for it is sometimes at my department where I serve, officers will come up to me and tell me, Barry, I heard so-and-so say this, and I want to tell you.
Okay.
And so we want to make sure we're listening to online, social media, conversations that we have, and what other officers may share with us.
Okay. Now, the problem with those interactions, especially with police officers, is that they already have a gallows humor, a very dark humor that may include quite a bit of humor about dying, about taking our own life. I've heard cops joke that, I wore that gun out chewing on the muzzle. Well, that's not very funny, but that kind of gallows humor exists in police culture. And so the baseline there is pretty high. And if a helper comes in from outside and they walk in and listen to cops joke for 5 minutes, they may want to put the entire shift on suicide watch. And that's probably an incorrect assessment. So how do you recalibrate for the kind of way that first responders talk, the comfort level with death that they have? How do you recalibrate and know when you're seeing leakage versus when you're just seeing this coping mechanism of dark humor?
That is such a great question. Let me reference what's been a great resource for me. It's written by the FBI lead negotiator. His name's Chris Voss. It's called Never Split the Difference. Rarely do I read a book twice. I read it twice. This is the FBI top lead negotiator. And what he talks about, he goes, now it was primarily written for FBI negotiators. I believe it's the best book a chaplain or a peer can read. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. But what he talks about is he goes, stop listening to words. What you want to listen to is tones and emotions. Stop listening to words. So you're right, man. I've heard some crazy gallows humor. However, the tone can be different.
Yeah.
And so you want to listen for what are the tones and what are the emotions behind the words. And it's difficult because as chaplains, I'm listening for words. I'm a public speaker. I'm listening for words. But what Christopher Voss talks about is stop listening to words, start listening to tones and emotions.
Yeah. There's a lot of shock humor inside the police department where we're seeing so many things that we're getting desensitized to, and cops will kind of shock each other to see if, hey, do you still, are you still with me? Do you still have that sensitivity anymore? Can I step all over it? That's kind of how they tend to operate. But when you're hearing something that is uncharacteristically forlorn and self-deprecating and self-minimizing, that if it's off their baseline, that could be leakage.
I totally agree with that, 125%. And I always tell chaplains, if you're unsure privately, do a check-in.
Yeah.
And you got to earn the right to be heard. So if you're a chaplain and you've been there for a month or two, do not do a check-in with somebody. No. But if you've ridden a bunch and you're at the agency and you've gotten over the thin blue wall and you've been accepted and officers are there and the officer, like you said, you've got some type of baseline, do a private one-on-one check-in.
Yeah. We've all heard stories of people who were contemplating taking their own life, and what stopped them was a chance trivial encounter where somebody sent them a text, somebody said, hey, see you tomorrow in the parking lot, and that was enough. That one little gesture was enough to have them reconsider.
So at the number one place in the world for death by suicide, the Golden Gate Bridge, There was a man that died by suicide, and a Jewish chaplain rabbi, after the man had died by suicide, they were at the scene, and the CSI and the rabbi found this note: if one person says hi to me on the way to the bridge, I will not kill myself. And so we never know the power of our words. Just one word, one check-in.
Yeah. Suicide prevention is not a measurable thing. We thrive as human beings on that contact. And if we can have that human contact, and if the chaplain, peer support, whatever other helper there is, if they can provide that contact, it will literally save lives.
So Jared, I want to say, I think you nailed that, is that we can't categorize how many people we've talked out of, we've defused, we've had coffee with, and then they decided not to die by suicide. We can only categorize, we can only measure those that died by suicide. And so to me, for those chaplains that are listening, keep it up. Don't quit. Just keep adding tools. I'm always adding tools to my belt.
Yeah. And same thing to like the officers that are listening. You don't have to have a degree in psychology. You just have to take a moment and show that fellow officer that you're thinking about them, and that may make the difference. It doesn't require any special skill. It just requires a little bit of human contact.
A police officer is 10 times more likely to go to another officer or a chaplain than a counselor like my wife. And I am not hating on counselors. My wife is a counselor.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with what you said there. A police officer with just a little bit of peer support, a little bit of chaplain training can make such a massive difference.
Absolutely. Can you give me another example of leakage?
So an example of leakage that turned out tragically was the Uvalde, Texas massacre. So the Uvalde, Texas massacre, it was a active shooter public school shooting. And what had happened is the shooter posted online what he was going to do, and nobody contacted law enforcement. Yeah. And then the shooter messaged a woman privately, and nobody contacted law enforcement. Yeah. And so this is an example of unintentional leakage. We had this in New York where we had a racist active shooter shooting just last year. This was posted online. The man went the day before, and many people saw suspicious behavior, but nobody moved or did anything. And so oftentimes people will say this phrase, if you see something, say something. We don't teach that. Here's what we teach. If you see something, say something now. And so we always, when it comes to life and death, we rationalize it. Oh, you know what? They were just joking. Oh, they're just blowing off steam.
They don't really mean it.
They just want to get everybody's attention. And so what we want to do, I say this a lot, is that when somebody kills themselves, they're not trying to kill themselves. They're trying to kill the pain. And what makes this, the reason we need leakage, here's what I take. Leakage is like the MRI for suicide prevention. So we can MRI a broken wrist. We can CAT scan to find a tumor. We can X-ray a broken bone. But there is no physical, tangible, black and white test to see if somebody is suicidal. The closest thing we have, in my opinion, is leakage training and leakage understanding.
I like that. The MRI for suicide prevention. I think I just found my episode title. That's perfect.
So most chaplain trainings don't have a leakage component. Most clinical counseling degrees don't have a leakage component. Most peer support training don't have a leakage component. And one of the agencies it's the only agency I know that is starting to teach leakage is Customs and Border Enforcement. On their own website, there was a man, and I'm not gossiping, I'm not speaking out of turn, this is on their website. They were talking about how Customs Border Enforcement suicides are at an all-time high, and that they're teaching leakage training. And they had a story online where there was a young Custom Border Enforcement officer. He had just got out of the briefing room. He was about to go into the field. And as he's leaving the room, he says under his breath, not jovially, he's not even saying it to anybody else, he's just saying it to himself underneath his breath, I just want to eat my own gun. And a coworker heard him say that, did not talk to him publicly, but pulled him aside privately. And that officer has received treatment, and he's alive today working in the field. That officer had been trained in leakage training. He spotted that as leakage.
The one that
helped.
Yep.
He spotted that as leakage, went to him privately. And the key is sometimes you can have the right message, but the wrong timing. Rarely do I speak to an officer publicly. It's 99.999% a private conversation.
Yeah. Which is also why you need to build rapport in advance.
The officer, in my experience, my understanding, spells connection, love, and friendship, TIME.
Yeah. Spend time with them. If you want to make the impact, you have to spend the time up front. Barry, I'm just so glad to see you again. I've not seen you since the national conference. You've been probably pretty busy since then, probably taking a 2-week-long nap, to recover, I'm sure. Yeah.
Jared, it was so awesome to have you at the national conference. And for your viewers, I want to encourage you, if you've never been to our National Peer Support Chaplain Conference, we call it the National Safety Conference. It's June 7th in Kansas City. And I want to tell you something. You're in for a treat. This year, he won't say it, so I will say it. Chaplain Jared Altick is going to be one of our instructors. Let me tell you who's going to be joining Jared. We've got free lunch, free breakfast, free dinner. We're giving away 2 firearms. We're giving away $1,000 of gifts. We're giving away a 3 or 4 day cruise for 2 people. Our keynote speaker is General Greg Martin. He is a major general, retired from the United States Army. He wrote a groundbreaking book for mental health chaplains, peer support clinicians called The Bipolar General. He's going to be our keynote speaker. We've got Lieutenant Colonel Bodie Bodenheimer is going to be there. He flew attack helicopters. He is now a chaplain. We've got some of the greatest chaplains and peer support from all over America. It's a 1-day conference, June 7th. It's $79 till January 1st, $99 after January 1st. Last year, it was standing room only, and I'm amped that you're coming to speak.
Well, I'm excited, and I'm thrilled that it's in Kansas City. I love that. I would travel to go to that, but the fact that it is really, within an hour's drive for me, that settles it right there. And so I'm very grateful.
We do that on purpose because your listeners are all over America. If you're in the United States, Kansas City is the most central place in America.
Yeah.
We have a brand new airport. We have chaplains and peers from Florida to California that come to our training, to our national conference.
Yeah.
And so...
I met people from all over. It was fantastic just to run into, these people are from Colorado, and these people are from Florida, and these people are from Texas. You had a lot of people from Texas there.
We have a lot of people from Texas.
Yes, you do. Yeah. But from England by way of Minnesota and all
Massachusetts.
over. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's 3 things we do at the national conference. Number one, I do believe we have the largest peer support conference in America and one of the largest chaplain conferences. But number one, we provide cutting edge training from people you could never hear. Number 2, you get to meet chaplains, connections, clinicians, cops, fire, peer support from all over America you would never meet. So you get the training, you get the networking, and then you get the inspiration.
Yeah.
And it's just a dynamic conference. It's free lunch, free breakfast, free dinner, thousands of dollars of giveaways.
Yeah, 1-day conference, but it's all day and it's really good.
8 a.m. to 8 p.m. You're drinking from a fire hydrant.
Absolutely. Well, Barry, thank you so much for being here. I deeply appreciate it.
Jared, it's an honor. And our classes, we make sure our students know about Hey Chaplain. And for all those chaplains that are listening, for all of you that are serving, thank you for your service.
Thank you. I want to thank you for indulging me in letting me and Barry talk about his National Safety Conference next June. I would do just about anything to support efforts in the wellness arena, but I'm especially eager to help when it comes from people of high character and trustworthiness, like Dr. Barry Young. So I love that Barry is traveling the country teaching chaplains and peer support people in both police and fire, and I think that we need more of this, not less. So if you get to go to one of Barry's trainings or to his National Safety Conference, then please do that. But also go to trainings that are held on the national level, or go to local trainings where experts are brought in and you're just training maybe in your own agency. Please help make trainings that are focused on officer wellness and behavioral health and other issues that affect our officers and other first responders. Please help make those common and normal and popular. These are conversations that need to happen for every first responder from the beginning of their career all the way to retirement and beyond. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
There's 6 of them and 1 of me. So I go down and they kind of start getting itchy because they know, we call it the felony stretch. Like in law enforcement, folks know what that is. The felony fidget, the felony stretch. They know something's fixing to happen. So inadvertently, the body starts to, they don't want to get in trouble. So it's a fight or flight response. So I was like, man, this is not going to go well. And so I said, hey guys, have y'all seen an alligator in this pond? And they just kind of stopped. They said, what do you mean? And this was not the pond we got it out of. But I said, yeah, man, it's mating season, And so they get pretty aggressive and they start, rolling around. I had to catch one last week. They said, oh man, whatever. So I whoop out that picture. I showed it to them. That's me sitting on this 9-foot alligator's back. And the gator's way bigger than me and all that. They stopped and said, man, what are we going to do? I said, well, we're going to leave this place. Y'all are going to get. And they said, all right, we ain't going to mess with you.
This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who quietly help behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach more cops and chaplains and other first responders around the world, then please consider making a $5 donation by following the link in the episode description. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.